Well, what inspired me to record this video, apart from my colleagues of the organization Diabetes Awareness in You pushing me to be on air while breathing the indoor air and staying safe at home, was actually this particular incident that happened today. In fact, wee hours of the early morning today. As a part of my on-call admission visit, I went to attend to a 22-year-old boy who was rescued virtually from almost a lock-up state in this kind of a dismal lockdown situation and was literally dumped into the ER in a state of decay, diabetic ketoacidosis. The primary cause of his decay, reportedly from a phone call made to his roommate, who has shifted base since the past 10 days, falls under the most significant category of psychosocial reason for insulin omission. And in this case, it was purely an apprehension of a shortage of supply and a stringent rationing with reduction of required insulin dose. Incorrect dosing of insulin, either due to irregular monitoring and titrating the dose, or due to short supply or inadequate resources, is the most glaring explanation of the root of this problem for decay in our community, in our country for that matter, but it is hidden inside a dark tunnel with almost no light so far at the end. This particular incident is somewhat like a boon in disguise as it unfolds the ripe time, hopefully the right opportunity as well, to talk on this subject which is in dire straits and needs to be identified and addressed in a most compelling manner. We often say diabetes is a silent disease, invisible disorder, an intangible malady. But decay makes this end of the spectrum look like a totally chaotic disability. It is a horrendously painful and a helplessly clueless way to die. You don't even get the time to know how things are flying off the roof. And unfortunately, everything goes on a slow motion mode simultaneously for you not to act judiciously on time. You will become so clouded that you will most likely smell, look, and eventually feel like death until and unless you land up in such an ER department where the frazzled nurses and frantic doctors, from their day and night courageous combat against corona, still manage to regain all the strength to fight tooth and nail to help you stay alive. But with a new lease and hopefully much more prudent and calculated arrangement of all your virtual assets this time, the glucometer, all your insulin supplies, for the remaining life to be more rewarding. I came back home and as I was washing my hands with soap and water and diligently for beyond 20 seconds, it did not really augur well but to be reminded of the harsh statistics about diabetes. During this time, sadly, 4 people with the diagnosis of diabetes have been stamped somewhere in the world. And unfortunately, 3 who were suffering from diabetes have kicked the bucket from some kind of complication or the other. Now the question is there a difference between the pain of death or the panic of dying? As cases of Covid19 proliferate, there's a pandemonium of fear unfolding alongside the panoramic pandemic of the coronavirus. The threat of any contagion can twist our psychological responses to ordinary interactions, leading us to behave in unexpected ways with a changed behavioral immune system. I think that exactly happened with this boy. Even the best of control person with diabetes, PWD, may fall prey to the perfect predator by obsessively worrying, especially during times like this, and finally lessening the immune system. Whereas this situation otherwise might look like completely normal to an ordinary man without diabetes to feel stressed, anxious, isolated, or just about being a little more than bored. What is very heartrending here is when I heard that a New Yorker had died of Covid-19 and has been dying almost every 3 minutes, like 180 seconds, on last Thursday. And by the time you could barely form your own opinion of how really menacing this is in terms of the exponential spread, at least in the US now, for the past 1 month, the headlines hit again on the CNN live news saying that the predictions made on the modeling data from health metrics and evaluation projects clearly say that only a week from now, so today is 12th, so perhaps on the 19th, we'll find New Yorkers will be dying about once every 100 seconds. And sadly, Americans are generally dying about twice as fast than the rest of the world. In this context, I would come back to my own country. India so far has reported a death rate of around 3%. The percentage of deaths with respect to the total number of confirmed cases, which is half than that of the global rate, with a total of 1,700,770 cases and 102,775 deaths worldwide, according to the data and statistics on the website Worldmeter. In India, the 20 to 40 age group account for 50% of the cases, and above 60, it is around 19%. The average age of an Indian will be 28-29 years, like the median age, meaning that half the population will be older to this and half is younger, naturally who are expected to have better immunity and less affected. What we are missing out in this context is much more sinister than the coronation of coroner's glory being made everywhere, where only 80% of the infections are just mild and asymptomatic. 15% may be severe infection requiring oxygen, and 5% can become critical requiring ventilation. And the crude mortality ratio of this pandemic so far is hovering around 3 to 4%. But if you care to look at the International Diabetes Federation statistics, towards the latter part of this last decade, juggling in between every 6 to 7 to 8 seconds, someone is estimated to die from diabetes or its complications. With 50% of those deaths, nearly 4 million in total per year, occurring under the age of 60 years. The highest number of deaths from diabetes comes from Southeast Asia, where almost 592,000 people died from the disease in 2019, with more than 4 lakh contribution from India. The number of deaths in India has tripled in the last 3 decades since 1990. Men with type 1 diabetes lose about 11 years of life expectancy compared to men without the disease. And women with type 1 diabetes have their lives cut short by about 13 years. Yes, there may be 3.46-fold elevated risk for influenza and pneumonia specific mortality in patients with diagnosed diabetes after adjustment of all confounders. But therefore, we have all the guidelines routinely recommending these PWDs to be vaccinated against seasonal flu annually and pneumococcus at specified intervals. But in this poor country, who takes the shot at providing these shots to them? And who really takes care of the medical part of the diabetes management? The simple fact is that the prevalence of diabetes is growing. The amount of insulin available to treat diabetes is too low, and the prices are too high, and we need to do something. Diabetes, we know, damages health, undermines educational and employment aspirations for many, affecting communities and forcing families into economic hardship. It becomes a vicious cycle. While diabetes is among the 7 leading causes of death globally, the finding is especially worrying because the disease kills people prematurely, with 30% of loss of life expectancy from the date of diagnosis of diabetes. More than 1.1 million children and adolescents younger than 20 years are living with type 1 diabetes, while 3 in every 4 people with type 2 diabetes, more than 350 million, are of the working age 20 to 64 years, out of which 30 to 40% will naturally require insulin at some point in the natural trajectory of the progressive order of the disease process. Around 130,000 children in India are living with type 1, which is more than double that of China. So keep in mind the insulin requirement of our population. Despite advancement of technology, because of a gross lack of the awareness status among the type 1 about type 1 diabetes among the general public, and at the primary and the secondary levels of education, particularly high rates of this type 1 diabetes is unfortunately reported for the age group of 0 to 10 years. Apart from that, 30 to 40% of type 1 diabetes are never diagnosed because they die from the life-threatening decay before a formal diagnosis is made. And more than 40% of those who are diagnosed are DKA survivors to start with. Yes, we all have to die of something someday. And if the question is, why not of diabetes? No issues. We would love to die after celebrating our 90th birthday, like the general predilection of affliction in that age group by Covid19. In fact, we all know that the elderly, the frail, they are dying of Covid19. Unfortunately, PWDs die prematurely. With 50% of those deaths, 4 million in total per year, occurring under the age of 60 years. So this finally brings us to the crux of our discussion matter, the medical supply issues of diabetes for people with diabetes. I will conclude the first session here, and then I will start the next session a few minutes from now.